Welcome to the Data Democracy. Presented by renowned O'Reilly author Ole Olesen-Bagneux. Empowered by Xenia. Make your data accessible and discoverable by anyone, anywhere, at any time.
Hi everybody, you're listening to the Data Democracy podcast, and I am your host, Ole Olesen-Bagneux, Chief Evangelist in Xenia and the author of the Enterprise Data Catalog, published by O'Reilly. In this podcast, we explore what an enterprise data democracy is with knowledgeable guests. Today's guest is Joe Reis. Joe Reis is the best-selling co-author of Fundamentals of Data Engineering and a worldwide known voice in the data space. I had prepared a bunch of questions for Joe, but he got me derailed in so many ways the conversation turned out to be surprising, full of laughter, and just very fun. I still managed to ask my questions though, about his old book, his new book, on data modeling, AI skepticisms, and what the C-level thinks of it. So here are my takeaways. A data leader takeaway. It's still early days for AI. You might want to benefit from it, but excitement is often fostered by vendor BS. So be very careful what you think it can provide you. And second, a data democracy takeaway. Claim your voice. Joe pointed out that not many people in the data space speak up even though they are qualified to do so. So just claim your voice. And third, a personal takeaway. Joe got me pragmatically derailed, and we should all do that from time to time to people we want to push a bit more to make them share perspectives. Okay, enough of me talking. Let's hear what Joe has to say. Hi, Joe.
Hey, what's up?
Happy to have you on. For the listeners, can you share a little bit about your background and what you've done in your career?
Yeah, my background, I've worked in data in some capacity or other since I started my career, I guess, right? That was over 20 years ago. But I've worked in a variety of fields in data, I suppose, right? So everything from, I guess, whatever you would call data science before it was data science, to data science when it was data science, to ML, to data architecture, data engineering, software engineering, probably a bunch of other stuff I forgot about. But yeah, now I spend my time mainly as an author and an educator, to put it very succinctly. Wrote a book with Matt Housley, my business partner. We wrote that back. I think it launched last year, right? We can get more into that in a bit. But yeah, so I write, do courses, travel the world giving talks. That's what I've been doing for the last almost year and a half. A bunch of stuff we can get into, but I do a fair number of things.
I think it doesn't make that much sense to ask you in depth about who you are, Joe. I guess you are a very, very known person in the global data community, and you've earned that I think quite justly. I mean,
thank you.
It's very fair.
It's a high honor coming from you, though. I mean, you're one of the shrewdest people I know in the industry. So it's
thank you.
It's high praise. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Joe. Well, this is very. Anyway, we can scratch each other's backs for half an hour, but
just ego stroke the entire time. It's fine.
Yeah, let's only do that.
You're awesome, Ole. Please.
Yeah, but Joe, you are just the best. I really, really admire you. Okay. So getting a little serious here. So I mean, I think it's fair to say, scratching your back a little more, that Fundamentals of Data Engineering really took the global data community by storm. It's been a bestseller ever since it came out, and I guess it still is, or really, really selling well, if not a bestseller. So what made you want to write Fundamentals of Data Engineering? Why did you want to write that book?
I mean, it was during COVID, right? So Matt and I, we needed a COVID project. We're running our business, Ternary Data. And I think the things that we'd noticed, and this is something I still harp about probably more than ever, actually. We feel like there's definitely an education gap in data engineering, for example. Like, a lot of people were becoming data engineers and not really understanding what that meant. I think we had our own ideas of what that meant, but there were, many definitions of data engineering. I think a lot of practitioners, but not really a first principles consolidated body of knowledge that would really help aspiring or I guess current data engineers really learn the craft, understand the craft, know where they stand in the craft, and so forth. And so I think that was really the motivation. I mean, there were definitely lots of tutorials about data engineering, lots of blogs about data engineering, and probably a few books, but a lot of these are focused on technologies, right? So it's like data engineering for Spark or data engineering for Python or on AWS or whatever. Nothing wrong with that. But I think what was missing was really the broader picture, again, from first principles, the building blocks upon which you can think about data engineering in a way that's not going to go stale in hopefully 5 to 10 years. And that was our, I think, intention with the book. And, I think the fact that it caught the world by storm, surprised us as well. But we can dive more into what those indicators are. I think it's actually a pretty interesting analysis in itself. But, we're definitely humbled and honored that happened. But in a lot of ways, this book probably shouldn't have happened. Our publisher, when we first pitched it, to our editor at the time, Jess Haberman at O'Reilly, she told us that this is probably a really bad idea for us to do this book. So I don't think she was wrong, but it was. I mean, because you got 2 first-time authors who are running a business who are trying to define a field from first principles from a foundational level, and she's like, it's a pretty risky move, but we're like, I don't know, I think it's the one we want to do, and thankfully she took a gamble on us, and I guess it took care of itself. But it almost, I guess I don't know what would have happened if we hadn't gone with O'Reilly, but but we're definitely glad she took a shot on us, and here we are. So
yeah, Jess also onboarded me, and I remember her style as being a little cash, but she's a very, very nice person. That said, right?
Very nice. Yeah, and I think she's looking out for the interests of the authors too, because she's not gonna sign a project she doesn't feel is going to be successful, right? So the fact, I think she can be tough, but I think that's definitely I think it's a good thing in a way, because I mean, when you're writing a book, as you got to know what you're getting yourself into, and this is not something. I mean, there's a lot of people that say they want to write books. I would say that most people shouldn't write books.
Yeah, agreed.
This isn't. Yeah, you know what's up. So
yeah, there's a very little. It's a very different experience than what you think it actually is, right?
Yeah,
getting the book accepted, writing the book, and then afterwards, once it's published, right? It's such an extreme process once you go through it the first time, and I guess for you it must have been even more extreme, right? Because like, as I see it, becoming an author is something where you close yourself into this like cave, and you just write and write and write, and you have to isolate yourself to do that. And then once the book is published, you're supposed to do the exact opposite, right? You're supposed to go out in the world and talk about your book to a maximum of people, being completely extrovert after being introvert, right? That must have been extreme for you. I mean, how many times have you traveled the world?
I don't even know. I really don't. I couldn't tell you, man. It's been a lot. But I think the thing is, I'm kind of those weirdos who can be introverted and extroverted at the same time. Like, I can go hide away, which I do often. I call it the Bat Cave. I posted a picture of it on my Instagram yesterday where I'm just hiding out and reading and writing, and that's what I do. But I think I'm equally adept at going out and obviously, talking to lots of people, and so but I would say most people aren't built for that, right? You're either one extreme or the other. And I would say the introverted extreme definitely, I think, is good for book writing. But if you tend to lean towards that for book promotion, and this is something the audience should know, like your publisher's probably not going to help you, market your book. That's really on you, unless you're, a New York Times top 10 bestseller, and then probably some money behind it. But for the most part, the responsibility of marketing the book is actually on the author, which I didn't know. I didn't know that at all. But thankfully, my background, is, we can talk about more about this. I used to be a, club DJ and, promoted, stuff like that. So my friend told me that I approached business and kind of a lot of things as like a club promoter. So that was a kind of interesting comment. But he used to be a professional MC and rapper, so he also did that, right? So he kind of understood the dynamics of just what that entails. But so what that means is you just have this like really innate sense of hustling and just getting the word out.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So to draw attention. And so, you don't do it in a you have to do it in a good way, but it's like you just you're sort of wired for that kind of thing. I think that was definitely a benefit for our book. But,
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It must have been quite the experience. I guess it still is. I mean, and I also, I mean, sure, obviously isn't about me, but that
no,
resonates.
Let's talk about that though. I'd love to know more.
Well, it resonates with me. I never like DJ'd or anything like that, but I did do a PhD once, and I remember this elitist approach to communication in universities, where talking to the press were like considered something that you had to do, and then you had to find a funny, giggly format to communicate with journalists and people that are. And when I wrote my book, and I knew I needed to communicate, I really wanted to do something else than that. And I think it's super wonderful that like data community is a place where and this all happened by coincidence, right? But it's a place where a lot of people podcast, a lot of people discuss, go to conferences. It's a very open place, and I love it. I really, really love it.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, enough about me.
I mean, let's talk about that though, because I'm very curious, and we could probably reverse the podcast since we're both podcasters. But like, what I'm interested in too is sort of the angles, maybe that you took with marketing your book. And I think your observation of the data community being multifaceted in terms of being receptive to different marketing messages is, I think, a very astute and correct one, right? If you're simply in academia, publishing research papers in a journal which like 10 people are going to read, that's a much different exercise. And academia is very much about not showing off. But academics do it in their own weird way. I mean, there's these weird ways that they flex, but it's a very academic way. And then people wonder why nobody reads their papers. So. Like, I mean, I sort of live in that world. Thank God I'm not full time in it. But the thing is, the world of, I would say, promotion has completely changed too. Like social media has been sort of the leveling force, where if you have good things to say and people want to hear them, then they're going to listen to them, right? And I think that's sort of the reality of it. If you have boring or I guess pretty crappy things to say, then you still would find your tribe. That's the weird thing, right? Yeah. But how did you go about marketing a book, especially coming from an academic background?
Well, one thing I said to myself was that I wouldn't want to repeat what I did while I wrote my PhD, and meaning that I wouldn't want to sit around and wait for the journalists to call me up because I made a press release on the university homepage, stuff like that. I wanted to like communicate with the world. I reached out to a lot of people, and luckily there are serious social media out there, primarily LinkedIn, right? But and where you can reach out to people and talk to them, and people also began discovering me through LinkedIn, and I was I took all the extra time I could at night, in the weekends, to discuss with people recording podcasts. And then it kind of, this is too much about me, Joe, but last thing about me then was that I remembered this feeling from the university that it was so difficult to get through, like get attention from media. And so I really, really forced myself to reach out to a lot of people. And then suddenly I just discovered that, like, by word of mouth, more and more people got to know my book, and then it kind of circulated, and it got its own like mechanism completely independently of what I wanted to do, and I was very, very fortunate to get that kind of attention. But Joe,
I mean, that's what you got to do, though. I mean, to unpack this a bit, because I think this is maybe useful information for the audience too. Like, you have to put yourself out there, right? I mean, nobody's gonna just gravitate towards whatever you did. I mean, and it doesn't really matter what the publisher you use. I'm coming to find out. Like, the litmus test I use is I look at Amazon rankings, for example. I think that's a pretty good litmus test of where your book stands in terms of popularity. And there's books that range from, some of the top books, at least in our vertical, all the way to books that don't sell anything, right? With the same publisher. It doesn't matter which publisher. And so a lot of that, I would say, one, it's the quality of the book that has to stand on its own. You know, that you can only try and market a crappy books for so long, but it won't. It doesn't have longevity.
No,
right?
of course.
And so then again, it depends. But you have to give it that initial kickstart. And you came into my radar on LinkedIn. I was like, this guy's smart, has some cool things to say. Here's sort of book. That's awesome. But I think I knew about you before you published your book as well. But you're putting yourself out there, and that's a good investment every time. So that's what you got to do. So for people out there, just know that like what Ole said is absolutely correct. Where if you're trying to take the traditional route of everyone will just come to me through the press release I put on my university site that like 10 people will read. Your click-through rate's going to be, say it's 10%. It's one person that shows up. So what's the cost benefit ratio of like doing this activity, right? So you got to have I think a higher meaning for wanting to do this kind of stuff than just clicks and book sales. But if you're fortunate enough to have built the audience, and the clicks or book sales will come, so that only happens once you put yourself out there.
Yeah.
Or you get lucky.
Well, of course you can be lucky, but I think one of the things that characterizes your book, your first book, I want to talk about the rumors of your next book also, Joe. I want to get a little into the questions I actually prepared, but
no worries.
but I
have a very good way of derailing.
It's very elegant.
Hosts, so.
It's very elegant, very discreet. But anyway, I just wanted to say in terms of the longevity of a book, what I remember from your book. And I was very happy when I read that because I did the exact same thing, was to talk about capabilities instead of talking about specific technologies that will, of course, disappear or mutate or transform in some way. Then I discuss capabilities, and I think that is a way to to make your book last longer. And I can definitely see that in the way my book is behaving. I have very solid sales over time. I mean, I am not, my book is still getting bought, and I'm very happy about that.
Your book will get bought for a long time because it was written in a way that's meant to be as timeless as you can in this industry. Right. Eventually what you talked about will be stale, and same thing with me, but
of course.
But you had a lot of interesting concepts because what's interesting about your book is it intersected with information and library sciences, which you don't often see in the data industry. It feels like these are almost separate disciplines, but in fact, they're actually very, very similar. They're just, I'd say in data they're unknown, but you took I think a very different approach. So that's what's.
Thank you. I think every book deserves to be unique. That was the uniqueness of my book. Your book was unique in the sense that it was the first body of knowledge that really assembled all the data engineering practices into one big book where you could simply read this book and become a data engineer, right? I think that was why it became so popular. But Joe, we have scratched our backs enough now. I want to get into the questions I prepared. I think. Can you share a little bit about the book that you are writing currently?
Yeah, I mean, the working title is Practical Data Modeling, right? So, and the whole notion of it is, there's a couple threads to this, right? First, the world of data modeling hasn't really, in my opinion, evolved since Data Vault, which, I mean, that book first came out, I think, 2000. Right? I mean, if anyone wants to tell me the big ideas that are used in production, by the way, not just some big ideas around blog posts, but the big ideas that are out there that have evolved the field, it's like that hasn't happened, right?
No,
that's the first thing. So, but a lot of things have happened since then. Machine learning, you have streaming, you have NoSQL. The data became popular. That's another thing that didn't happen before, right? Like when Data Vault was out, that was still in the dark ages of data, in my opinion, where that was data is still very much an IT function. Now, it's the notion of data products, and data is very much data and AI, all this stuff, right? It's at the forefront. It is what it is, So I mean, that's the first thread. And the second one, I feel, is as data became more popular, the practice of data modeling has largely been forgotten by the latest crop of data practitioners, which you can dive into. And so the consequences of this manifest themselves in a number of ways. I would say that, in some ways, I feel like the types of problems that I see, in my consulting practice, we do data engineering and data architecture consulting at Ternary. See lots of things happening. I talk to lots of practitioners in my talks and travels and everything else. So pretty good idea what's going on, and it definitely feels like the lack of data model knowledge is manifesting itself in a number of ways. It's costly, I would say overly or unnecessarily costly cloud bills and technology
Exactly.
bills,
Yeah.
costly, unnecessary work and effort, right? Often at the expense of not understanding the data that one has or how it translates into greater value for the business. And so and you also have giant amounts of data sprawl, because now it's super easy to create data sets, create queries. And so this manifests itself in just, it reminds me of one of those hoarder shows that you see on TV, where people just pile crap upon crap in their trailer home and for years. And that's very much similar to the types of data that we have in a lot of companies right now. And so I think this is all the motivations for the book. And really, I think the other motivation that I have for the book is, and I'll get into what it's about in a second, but the other thing I've noticed is there's a lot of religious war still in data modeling. Right?
Yeah.
And why is this? Right? So you're having these silly, petty arguments about a field that is literally dying before your very eyes. When the thing we need to do is I would say, come together as a field, recognize that there's more than one way to do things. There are many ways to do things. And just by recognizing across the data lifecycle, the various tools, techniques, practices, and ways of thinking about data modeling across the lifecycle, and knowing the trade-offs of each approach, right? I think by understanding this, you develop what I call mixed model arts.
Oh, cool.
Right. So I'm an MMA nerd. I used to be a quasi practitioner, but the whole point is, like, in MMA, mixed martial arts, like, you're not going to stick to one true style. Or if you want to have an argument about who, if boxing's more effective than wrestling in an MMA match, you're going to get killed.
Yeah.
I can guarantee you this. And so this is in the real world, having one true approach, it leads to, I think, very disastrous consequences. Because again, the things I mentioned before, you have many more types of systems, many more types of using data than you did before, many more applications of it. So you need to understand all the trade-offs and the techniques and the approaches up and down that data lifecycle, and know what to use when. As simple as that. So the book attempts to capture, I think, to revisit the whole notion of data modeling, as well as explore the various techniques you can use across the life cycle in a very unopinionated way. At the end of the day, I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm going to tell you what the trade-offs are. It's up to you to make your decisions, just like you would in an MMA match. Like, the world's very dynamic. There's no such thing as saying this technique is going to work every single time. That's not reality. And I feel like data modeling purists tend to approach the world through a very static lens, where their approach is the right way. I think this is absolutely ignoring reality. So
well put. I think that is wonderfully pragmatic. It's the kind of approach that I really like to technology and architecture, and it's sorely missed in many companies, right? Where you have these fanatics that believe in one way of doing things, and it's just not very functional to have such an approach.
Well, it's not very functional, and it ignores the fact that data. I mean, so if you're going to, because I think in our world, we tend to, a lot of the purists tend to look at things through the analytical lens. Like, oh, well, this is analytical data modeling, ignoring the fact that data is created upstream. That's how it goes, right? And actually, your most important place to get your model right is when data is created at the source, right? And that's more of what I'm focusing on. As the book is more geared towards software engineers, application developers, and so forth. If you can get your data right there, everything else is fine. But if you don't, I mean, at best you're duct taping and gluing the data to make it somehow work. But this ignores the fact of root cause, right? But again, the purists will say, "Oh, well, that's fine, but we'll handle it with our specific technique, downstream analytics land." And I'm like, that entirely misses the entire point of what this is about. Data is a continuum. Modeling happens at every use case of data, by the way, because you're making the data useful and believable for a certain use case. Doesn't matter where it is. And again, it's just the world's changed, I would say, since a lot of the big ideas in modeling came out, but they're still relevant. You still need to know about them. But again, there's just the world has just become a very much more chaotic and dynamic place than it used to be. That's reality. So to your point, one size ain't gonna fit all. That's it.
Well, you derailed the conversation here.
I'm good at that.
I could perhaps yeah. Well, you are. But I could perhaps derail your book a little bit, Joe, because I think what you're saying is very much something that I lived through, and quite honestly, from a professional angle, suffered from in the 20 years ago when I was in university, like young student in university, and I was like seeing this community called like library world falling completely apart with a lot of methodologies, a lot of very refined practices and rules and institutions, and everything was really neatly organized. And what the web did to the library world, obviously, was to simply democratize, well, the topic of this podcast, to democratize the access to knowledge and information, data as well. And what that resulted in was kind of two fractions. You had one fraction, the people standing, say, at the train station, saying, this is our world, we belong here, this is our rules, this is the house we built. And then there was the train, and certain people went up on the train and said, okay, we don't know where we're going, we have a lot of learnings, methodologies, we know how to structure information, data, knowledge, but we don't know exactly where. I think there's something about web pages, stuff like that, that was like in the year 2000s, where information architecture emerged as a concept and as a discipline that grew out of library information science, right? That entire discipline of like organizing the content on the web so that it could be useful for search engines and all that. And when I hear you talk about data modelers and that view of like we have to organize our data in this way, we have to model it precisely like that in order to make it work. That is for me a reminiscence of what I heard 20 years ago in the library information science field, where certain people, not all, but certain people, they just denied the reality. They denied that, okay, we're moving towards a completely new technology landscape, and what we learned needs to be recontextualized in order to be interesting.
Yep.
I think that's so. I hope I derailed your book a little bit there, Joe. Maybe you should add a paragraph about
wonderful
that.
comparison, actually. I mean, it was Jessica Talisman turned me onto a book, The Discipline of Organizing. Yeah. Fantastic book. And, I've been the fun thing about writing books is you get to explore areas of study that you normally wouldn't. And I got to say, library sciences is just one of those areas where I'm a complete ignoramus, to be frank. It's something that. But when you realize that world intersects with the quote data world, I would say very, very nicely, it opens your eyes to things. But that book also does talk about sort of the progression and the evolution of organizing in a library context, right? So as you point out, I mean, there used to be the Dewey Decimal System, and there's Library of Congress, and there's other ways of organizing books, but then books become digital, and the web happens, and then searching it becomes different, for example. And I think a really good tangential example of this, I can't remember what source this comes from, but a college professor wrote, I think it was an article about how he asked his younger students, younger college students, where I think he showed them a folder structure, like what a folder is. And like the concept of a folder is completely lost on this whole generation. Because they're so used to searching for things in a search bar. Like, what would be the point of a folder?
Exactly.
Why would you use one?
Why?
If you use Google Drive,
you
might use a folder because we're old and we like to conveniently put things into their places. But in Google Drive, you can probably just as well get away with not using a folder. I think most of my documents aren't organized in folders unless I need them to be. It's like, why would you do that?
Of course. Why would you do that? And yeah, exactly. And so to Windows users out there, if you ask what the symbol of save was in old school Windows, like they have no idea. Young kids do not know that that's a floppy disk. So that's just the evolution of that. I want to touch a little bit upon your pragmatic approach in general. I've been seeing a lot of posts and a lot of discussions where you strike me as not an AI skeptic, but just someone that considers the pros and cons. You're not like euphorically cheering everything generative AI. Why is that? That's something I want to know.
I'm older.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
I mean, but I've been in this space for a while, right? And I've been been around computers since I was a child and was on the internet, before the browser came out, right? So I mean, I've seen a lot of these cycles happen, and so part of it is definitely being curmudgeon-y and jaded. I'll give you that much. But I think the other part of it is when everybody's talking about something, especially like your kids and their parents who aren't technologists, like what people are doing with ChatGPT, you have to take a step back and I think dissect why they're talking about it and what's all the fuss about. It reminds me very much of when the web browser came out, actually, and definitely and searching the web, with search engines and that. And then a whole world was unlocked. And I think generative AI feels very much like that, where I think people get it automatically. I mean, I remember at my kid's 6th grade class, right, where they're getting out of school, I stayed there for an hour and I just hung out and talked about AI. My favorite talk of the year, by the way. It was so much fun. I just passed it on my phone and had ChatGPT on it. And we just sort of explored the boundaries of ChatGPT. They had a lot of awe, because at first they were like, "Oh, AI is gonna rule the world and take over." And I was like, "Well, let's understand what that means exactly." I have my phone with ChatGPT, which may be AI, maybe it isn't, but we'll say that it is for now. And I just want you to explore what the boundaries of this thing can do, right? And I think at the end, it was a good dose of reality for them in a healthy way, where they understood just how to use this technology and what is it good for, what is it not, right? And so.
Yeah.
So, I've been through a few machine learning hype cycles. I've worked in, most of them, and especially in the most recent epochs. And so I think a healthy dose of I would say just reality is needed. Like there's definitely utility, and I think large language models have a ton of utility. I use them every day. I use them every day more as a conversational agent, just as kind of a rubber duck for things. But you also need to understand that it could be lying to you. So it's dealing with the sort of the friend that you don't quite trust, but they're fun to talk to. It's like the friend who tells tall tales once in a while. And so, but so I think that, yeah, you're absolutely right. I'm not a skeptic. I'm not skeptical of most things, actually. I think that, any technology that comes out has utility. And over time, it matures to have great utility. I mean, blockchain is you're finding this with certain applications too. You're finding this, with VR headsets, you're finding it with everything. Everything has utility. I mean, the world runs on machine learning. That this isn't a new thing, right? It's been going on for a long time. The world literally runs on machine learning at this point, because it scales what people can't do. And so I think the way I view things is understanding not what's going to change. I think that's too hard of a question to answer. But if you can understand what's not going to change as quickly, this provides a better context for, I think, through which to view technologies like generative AI, large language models, and so forth. So the things that aren't going to change, or people are not going to want to find results slower, in a less convenient way.
Yeah, exactly.
So large language models provide that. Are the answers correct? I don't know. You tell me. Right? That's the believability part is the one thing where I think we need to get it right. But there's a lot of work on that right now. I mean, I think the hallucination problem will largely be solved, or at least solved to a degree that's good enough.
Yeah. I also think that. I actually heard of something very interesting by the CEO of a Israeli tech company called VIX. He said that hallucination was the only thing interesting about large language models, because he called that artificial intuition. And even though that intuition was wrong all the time, that was the only element of surprise. And that completely twisted my view on
That's
on that
interesting.
kind of. But yeah, I like it's just a weekend pastime thing. But I thought it was quite interesting.
I mean, but if you compare it to humans, I mean, God, we make stuff up all the time. I mean, that's just
exactly.
That's
very human. That's very human.
So
maybe artificial intelligence won't take over the world, exactly because they will fuck up just as much as us. Well, I don't know if can say that on
I don't know. You blurted it out, but
Yeah.
no, but you're absolutely correct. Or you're hallucinating, one of the two. But the whole point is, these are new technologies, and I think it's going to have a lot of utility. So where I counter that with a dose of realism is when I see people saying, "Oh, well, these AI models they'll largely replace the classical statistical models," right? So I mean, I heard somebody say, "Oh, you can just use your large language model instead of using XGBoost," and I was like, "That's literally not how a large language model is programmed. Nor, these are two different things. It's like comparing a cucumber to an apple. It's like, or a cucumber to like beef jerky. They're literally not the same things. And so I think there's when I start seeing hype like that, and I think a lot of confusion, and I would say a lot of like blatant disregard for reality. That's when you start seeing me come out, and I think being quite blunt about these things. One, because I care enough about the state of the industry to want to vocalize when I see nonsense occurring, and there's a lot of nonsense right now in the AI industry. I think that I had an article in my Substack called AI Carnival Barkers, where it was in reference to just all the BS that I see in the world. And in reference to just a lot of the BS I hear personally. Like I was on a panel and somebody was saying, well, obviously we're going to have AGI, artificial general intelligence, by the year 2030 because that's predicted by the singularity. And I'm like, you have a vested interest in saying this because you're part of the Singularity Institute, right? Like this is like, and I think that's, so you always got to couple these claims with saying, well, I don't know, why 2030? Why not 2029? Why not tomorrow? Why not 50 years from now? Right. So I think there's just a lot of prognostications, and there's a lot of opportunity for people to come out of the woodwork and appear to be very smart, about this stuff. I've been doing this stuff for a long time. I'm not saying I'm like the smartest guy in the world, but I do have a very good BS detector.
Yeah, exactly. But that's definitely what I sense and what I enjoy about your post and,
thank you.
about your writing in general. So,
thank you.
So that's really, really good indication of like a sound perspective that is definitely something else than just the regular hype that everyone that not everyone, but that a lot of people gets
there's a lot
carried
of money
into, right?
Well, there's a lot of money being thrown into this field right now. So you're going to see everyone coming out of the woodwork, including all your crypto bros and metaverse bros from back a couple years ago. Because now this is like the latest thing you can get a lot of money thrown at you for, right? And
exactly.
But I think the interesting thing is that what I'm curious to see is after the OpenAI debacle that happened a few weeks ago, like what's the appetite to to throw more money into this, because I mean that thing kind of almost completely changed the AI landscape in about 3 days.
Oh yes, agreed. Very much agreed. Then people were, of course, more cautious about whether or not they could make big investments in these kind of initiatives and technology. Yeah. Well, anyway, Joe, this was very, very enlightening, fun. Very nice to
you have a weird idea of fun, but yeah, okay.
yeah. Data geek fun, at least.
Yeah.
But it was very nice of you to take the time.
Anytime, man.
Take care, Joe. Thank you for being on.
Anyway, thank you.